This behemoth is Acer's 43-inch CG437K S, a newer version of their existing KP model, both of which sport a 43-inch 3840 by 2160 144Hz VA panel, HDR 1000 certification, supposed 1 millisecond VRB response time, whatever that means, 90% coverage of the DCI-P3 spectrum, and even is fully G-Sync compatible. For those kind of specs, you would expect this to require a second mortgage, or I suppose for anyone under 40, their first, and yeah, you would be right. Acer lists this at $1,600 on their US site, so yeah, it's safe to say that this is a Halo tier product. Let's start with the main attraction, the panel. You get 43 inches of 144Hz 4K magic beamed into your eyeballs with a maximum of 1,000 nits of peak HDR brightness, or at least around 750 nits in SDR, as my SpiderX reported. To say that that is bright enough for any non-HDR situation is possibly an understatement. You also get 93% coverage of the DCI-P3 spectrum in my testing, and a calibration report in the box quoting an average delta E of less than 2, meaning if you want to both work and play on this, you should have a rather good time. The static contrast ratio is quoted as 4,000 to 1. Personally, I measured more like 3,500 to 1 with my SpiderX, although I'm inclined to give the panel the benefit of the doubt here, as the SpiderX is likely to be a touch inaccurate at those sorts of high brightness levels. Plus, you can enable their ACM, or active contrast management, feature which supposedly offers up to 100 million to 1 instead. To the eye though, content on this looks pretty stunning, with rich and vibrant colours jumping out at you from the moment you sit down in front of it. Considering this is the size of a TV, it wouldn't be out of place to use it as one. The biggest drawback here is that thanks to the use of an edge-lit backlight, there's kind of no real good local dimming support. Now, in theory it does support local dimming, just not full array local dimming, meaning that the HDR experience is a little lackluster. There's no mini LED backlight to speak of, and it's no OLED, although personally I wouldn't be too upset about that, as the SDR experience is already pretty fantastic for content consumption and indeed for creation too. Equally strangely, unlike the Philips Momentum 55 with its included Bowers & Wilkins soundbar, the CG437K only includes two rather compressed and tinny 10-watt speakers and only a 3.5mm headphone jack for audio output, meaning you'll likely want your own sound system hooked up directly to your PC. Of course, unless you want to use this with a console, which I think is kind of the main attraction for this style of display, in which case you'll either have to live with the built-in speakers or make use of that headphone jack for a set of, say, 2.1 speakers instead. To top off the unusual I/O, you kind of only get two HDMI ports here. Albeit they are HDMI 2.1 ports, you do also get a DisplayPort 1.4 port as well as a USB-C port that does appear to support DisplayPort Alt Mode, but on the laptop that I was testing with, I could only get it to run a maximum of 1440p 60, not even 4K 60, let alone 4K 144, although I'm not entirely sure if that's the laptop that I was testing with or this display. Their spec sheet doesn't even list DisplayPort Alt Mode support on the USB-C port, so well, take that one as it comes. While that is plenty of I/O for a couple of consoles and a PC, other options like the Philips Momentum feature 3 HDMI ports alongside DisplayPort and USB-C for a touch extra flexibility, especially if you are planning on replacing your TV with this. Happily though, thanks to the use of HDMI 2.1, both the PS5 and Xbox Series X can run at up to 4K 120Hz, and a PC can use either HDMI or DisplayPort to hit the full 4K 144Hz even with 10-bit color. Now, since I mentioned the consoles and gaming, it's worth talking for a second about response times. Being a VA panel, this was never going to set any records, even if Acer are hellbent on insisting that it will, with their honestly purposefully misleading 1 millisecond VRB response time figure that's plastered everywhere. VRB stands for Visual Response Boost, which is Acer's name for backlight strobing, aka ULMB or ultra low motion blur. The figure that they are quoting is what most quote as the MPRT response time, and is not a measure of the panel's performance in any way. What it means is that with the VRB setting on extreme, the monitor turns the backlight off for all but 1 millisecond per frame, leaving with a red glow fading to black in between. Personally, those sorts of modes give me an almost instant headache, so are completely unusable, and even if you don't get that sort of instant headache, you're likely to experience considerably more eye strain thanks to that literally flickering in your eyes for every second that you're looking at it. Now, the reason I suspect Acer is so happy to quote the how long we turn the screen on for time is that the actual gray to gray times are just dreadful is the only word that comes to mind. On the default normal overdrive mode, you can expect response times as bad as 42 milliseconds on darker transitions, or an average of nearly 18 milliseconds. If you manage to have it allow you to change the overdrive settings with adaptive sync enabled, something I had inconsistent trouble doing, and you set it to its extreme overdrive mode, you do get a slight reduction down to more like 13 milliseconds average, although still with some pretty terrible results, especially at lower brightness levels. This is really bad performance. The fact that they're quoting this as a 1 millisecond monitor is laughable at best. And that's not just on paper too, as it translates into pretty poor motion performance. As you can see in the UFO test, you can see just how many copies are present on screen at once, especially in the darker line, and also just how clear those other frames are. I count 5 or 6 copies, with the most recent frames still being bright enough to be able to sort of trick me into thinking that they could be the most recent ones instead, or that the UFO's going the other way. Setting this, the UFO to a faster speed also shows you just how big a problem that is. The entire screen is full of still visible frames, but actually gaming on it doesn't feel quite as bad. Although I should mention that for fast-paced games where accuracy and reaction times are important, this likely isn't the monitor for you. I found it hard to hit shots or even feel confident that when I pressed left click, my cursor was actually aiming at an enemy. For something like a racing game, I wasn't quite as bothered by it, although with just how slow the panel can be, it did remove a lot of the sharpness that comes from this being a 4K panel, making the game feel a little sluggish, a little blurry or smeared, again especially in faster motion. For more story-based, slow-paced games, I think this would be fine, but as your next pro esports display, yeah, probably not. I am happy to report though that the input lag over HDMI using my time sleuth was around 3.6 milliseconds, which, while not quite as impressive a number as the 1 millisecond or lower displays that I've tested previously, it's still a fairly reasonable and perfectly adequate results, especially for this type of display. What I don't think is quite as reasonable is the stand. Specifically, its complete lack of adjustability. You can't even tilt this at all, even slightly, which would have been a welcome adjustment, at least for me personally while testing. While this seems to be a fairly common trend among this style of display, Philips managed to allow their 55-inch soundbar-equipped Momentum 55 with tilt functionality, and actually for considerably less money, I might add as well. So come on Acer, you can do better. At least you can use the 200 by 100 VESA mount if you do want to wall mount it, and interestingly the stand's sort of singular large foot has some slight mouldings to allow controllers to sort of somewhat rest on the top. It's not a full pad or anything, but the controller will still rest on your desk to some degree, but I guess it is a nice touch for the console gaming market that I think this is primarily targeted at. And another honestly baffling decision is the inclusion of these Argb strips. These strips, sized relatively well for each side of all four sides of the back of the display, are actually include magnets in them so that you can stick them to, themselves or stick them to... oh, nothing. Instead, you'll have to use the included sticky tape to stick them to the back of the display. And I guess wherever you see fit. I mean, Acer could have just built these in, or at very least put indents or markings on the rear panel where they expect you to put them, and ideally left connectors in the panel and in place so that you can hook them up easily. Instead of giving you these four massive 2 or 3 meter long each ferrite cord wires and individual connectors on the rear I/O, instead of being able to daisy chain them together with short little jumper wires, and since they're addressable LEDs that should work just fine. Oh, and these don't even do what Philips AmbiGlow can do by analysing what's on the screen and sort of projecting the average colours out to help extend the display or sort of increase immersion. No, these are the usual rainbow pattern, or for use with the only game listed as supported, League of Legends, and only to respond to your actions in-game. Again, come on Acer. But I think the final nail in the coffin for the CG437K Space S is actually the competition. Now, I've mentioned the Philips Momentum 55, which is a pretty equal, if a touch larger panel, but with the benefits of being a better all-rounder TV replacement style display, and all for just £900 right now. But I would say the real competition comes in the form of OLEDs. Philips themselves sell a 55-inch 120Hz OLED for just under £1,000, and LG just launched their 43-inch C2 OLED, which also supports 120Hz, quotes low input lag as one of its key features. And while it is a touch pricey at around £1,400 right now, and also apparently there's an issue where the first batch are using LG's older panel tech, so you might be better off waiting a touch longer for the newer panel to be included instead. But you get instant response times, infinite contrast ratio, a much better HDR experience, and even likely better speakers, and just all for fairly similar money. All in all, the CG437K Space S definitely has its strengths, but it also has a fair few weak spots that make it hard for me to overly recommend, especially with its eye-watering price tag. It certainly wouldn't be bad by any means. I mean, it's still a great experience to use overall, but if you're paying this kind of money, I'm not sure that this would be your best option for that kind of cash. Maybe at a lower price tag, sub £1,000 for sure, it might start to make more sense, but considering that the older KP model is still listed for £1,100 on Amazon right now, I somewhat doubt we'll see that anytime soon. With that said, those are my thoughts, but I would love to hear yours in the comments down below. What do you think of the CG437K S? Is it a monitor that you would pick up yourself? Would you go for the 43-inch LG OLED instead, or maybe something a little bit bigger, a little bit smaller? Feel free to let me know. Also, I'll leave a link to this if you do want to check it out or check out pricing when and where you watch this. I'll leave that link in the description down below. The stock availability for the KS model seems to be pretty limited. I think it's still rolling out right now, so feel free to keep an eye on that if you are interested, but that'll be a global Amazon affiliate link you can check out there. I'll also leave a link to the Philips Momentum monitor and the review of it in the cards above or on the end cards when that pops up. And if you want to see more videos like this one from me, then feel free to hit the subscribe button, turn on the notification bell, check out the rest of the videos on the end cards. And if you want to support me in these videos, then feel free to check out the YouTube join button and become a YouTube member, Patreon with that link in the description, merch, hoodies or t-shirts like this one, again linked in the description, or well, some other affiliate links or places like Overclock UK. If you're buying from there, feel free to take a look at that as well. Otherwise, thanks for watching, hope you enjoyed it, I'll see you on the next video.